Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar on the iPad video production. So today we'll be doing an introduction on the iPad and capturing video with the iPad, which is really a nice, powerful, robust video camera, all in this little tiny iPad. So we're going to look at how the camera works, some of the video concepts, video essentials I like to call them, and we'll go from there. So my name is Tom Strnad. I'm the lead digital artist of the Creator Space, and our live webinar is happening through right live here in the Blue Mountains. And let's have a look at what we'll be talking about today. So we will look at the video essentials. So format, frame rates, aspect ratio. Then we're going to look at the camera settings on the iPad, and also the grid option. So the grid option on the iPad and how that relates to something called the rule of thirds. So we'll have a look at that as well. It's a great photographic technique, and it basically comes down to even painting and so on. So that great rule of thirds, we'll look at what that means. Types of shots and storytelling. Then we're going to look at the camera app and the video mode in the camera app that's just built into our iPads. We'll look at auto exposure and auto focus and what that means. We'll look at locking focus and exposure and how that can help us control our image a bit better as well. And then we'll look at manual exposure, because once we lock, we can also make things brighter or darker with exposure. And then we'll look at some of the aspects of storage. So local versus iCloud storage and how that works. And then we'll have some time for a Q&A. So we'll have a nice jam-packed session here, and definitely you can add questions as we go, and we'll get to those all at the end, and we'll try to answer everything. I just want to mention that if you're looking for more webinars, events.tbmcs.ca, you can find some more upcoming webinars. There'll be an iPad editing one coming up as well. So that will be kind of the complement to shooting video, getting comfortable with that, capturing that, and then how we can edit it and make short films as well. You can also access our YouTube channel, tbmcs.ca, and there we actually have a 4-part short film project, multi-part video that outlines how to make a short film with an iPad. So writing it, shooting it, and doing the editing. So you can kind of go through that too if you want to explore that as well. So some great options to explore. Okay, so let's get into the video essentials. So formats. This is always a big question because we get these types of formats available, and with an iPad, sometimes you'll have a bunch of things to choose from, and we'll look at that. Not every iPad, not every smartphone too, if you want to apply it to that, has all these options, but there's really two main formats. So the format is essentially the type of video resolution being captured, right? So there's HD, which is 1920 by 1080. That's also known as full HD. So we'll hear that term sometimes, full HD. My monitor is full HD. So, and that's what that's referring to. So that's the full HD resolution, 1920 by 1080. What the resolution refers to are the horizontal and vertical lines. So the second one are the horizontal amount of lines, and the first number refers to how many vertical lines. So those intersected give you the amount of resolution. So 1080 horizontal lines of resolution, and that's usually the defining aspect. So oftentimes HD, we'll hear it as 1080 HD, so that horizontal line. Then we get into UHD, or it's 4K, a lot of times referred to, and essentially that's double what HD is. So it's 3840 by 2160. So you can see the 1080 times 2, 2160. So it's double the amount of horizontal lines of resolution. So that gives you double the quality, double the amount of information as well, right? So that's going to come into play later when we talk about storage. Also, on a lot of the iPads and smartphones or iPhones, there's also regular HD, which was one of the early HD formats, and it's 1280 by 720. So you can see it's smaller than the 1920 by 1080, but this allows you to save some space by being smaller than the full HD, right? So that's a really nice format. It's pretty similar to HD, And I would, challenge anyone to really see the big difference. But again, if you really are, want to have that full HD resolution, you want to be shooting in 1920 by 1080. Otherwise, we do have that 1280 by 720. So those are the formats. That's one of those first questions. What kind of format? And some iPads can only shoot 1920 by 1080. And more of the, like the iPad Pros now, they have that UHD. So that's why I mention it. If anyone out there is looking at that type of a system, the iPad Pro, it does allow you to do 4K, and I think more iPads will go that way. So it's definitely good information to know about. Okay, so here's a comparison, just a nice chart, what the formats mean. So you can see when we had like DVD, that kind of old standard definition type video, which was 720 by 486, a lot smaller. Then we have the 720p. So that's the 1280 by 720, it gets bigger. Then you have the full HD, so that's the 1920 by 1080. And then you have the Ultra HD or 4K 3840 by 2160. Now this isn't necessarily to scale, but we're just seeing how everything's doubling, getting bigger, right? So more information in the image. So it's similar to taking photographs. So we think about if you take a photograph, we look at megapixels and what does that how does that help the image? So higher megapixel count gives you more information and data and quality. So that's the same kind of idea here with the HD formats, that you can get better quality with the higher megapixels, if you will, right? So remember with video, we're taking a bunch of individual stills and then they're played back at a bunch of frames per second. And that will take me to the next statement here. So Video Essentials frame rates. So this is a reference to how many frames are captured or shown per second, right? So 30 frames per second or 30 FPS, that's explaining how many individual frames are captured and then played back, right? So the capture and playback is usually the same. And I just made a note here. So the original standards, film, for over 100 years, it's been running at 24 frames per second. So generally when you see movies still in the theater, that's what we're seeing. And then video has always traditionally been 30 frames per second. And then I just have a note here, the actual 29.97. And there's just some technical in that to allow for the synchronization on TV sets with our electrical power system. So if we think about that, 24 and 30 frames per second, still pretty much the standards of what we're generally using. And we'll see a lot of, in our iPads, they're usually shooting at 30 frames per second, and some models can do 24. So it's kind of our two main formats of, our two main frame rates, I should say, right? So remember, we have our formats, we have our frame rates. So digital video frame rates, there are many frame rates available on personal devices. So this is more about the iPads and what's available on them and iPhones and so on. So the 24 frames per second, currently the iPad Pro can do that, 24 frames per second. 30 frames, all iPads can cover that. There's a 60 frame iPad Pro only, and these specs are changing as new models come out. So, tomorrow this could already be changed, that other iPads might have that. But just to give you what's current, 120 is a slow motion format. And what happens there is the high frame rate can then be played back at normal. So 120 frames are captured per second, then it's played back at 30. So you can see it's about 4 or 5 times slowed down. And that's how we get those slowed down motions of, someone walking slowly, or it could be great for like sports video if you want to see what a bat swing looks like, or a golf club, things like that, skiing in slow motion, right? So it's a nice tool for that kind of slow motion analysis for sports. It could be for dramatic effects, so that kind of slow motion thing. And then some of them, the iPads, we can actually do 240 frames per second. So it's like an ultra slow motion. It's essentially almost 10 times slower, right? So you get a really ultra slow motion type look. So those are the frame rates. So again, we're generally looking at 30 frames is our go-to, and then we have these slow motion options, and then we'll have that 24 and 60 that are on the iPad Pro right now. So that's our frame rates. So then we have the aspect ratio, and traditionally digital video has been based on a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So that's the horizontal type of monitor. And what it's really referring to is, if you take the horizontal side is 16 and then the vertical is 9. So 16 to 9 is the aspect ratio. And then there's also the early video used to be 4 by 3 or 4 to 3. So it was almost a square. So 4 horizontal to 3 vertical, that kind of square image. And you can see that in the bottom right, that little square with the play arrow. That's kind of like what a square TV image would look like, right? So that aspect ratio 16 by 9 is really what happens on our iPads or iPhones as well. It can be taken to that. And it's designed to fit the same TV screen. So if you have a HD LED or HD monitor, they are in a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So again, that aspect ratio might come up, and we'll look at how this plays in a little bit here. So vertical video, this is, what is this? And since the advent of smartphones, the phone screen was designed to be 16 by 9, and that's really kind of the little green box in the middle there. So that was the idea, to have a 16 by 9 HD monitor on your phone. But what happens is we generally use phones vertically. So if we go to make a phone call, because our earpiece is on the top and our mouthpiece is on the bottom, we use them vertically. So we're used to the phone being vertical and not really using it horizontally, even though it technically could work that way too, because the microphones can pick us up from on a horizontal way. But again, that would look funny, so we use them vertically. What's happened is we also then hold the phone vertically. So by holding it vertically, what happens is if we're recording video, we shoot it vertically. So all of a sudden, that image is tall instead of horizontally wide, right? So it's similar to photography, where you have, you do vertical or landscape, horizontal pictures, or you can do vertical pictures as well in photography, right? So you can take your camera and you hold it vertically, and you get that like longer profile, someone standing, let's say, or taller image, and then you can hold it horizontally to get that horizontal image of a person. So really two different frame types, right? The vertical and the horizontal. And then going back to, if you look at art galleries, generally, like, when you look at landscapes and things, a lot of them are horizontal, and then oftentimes like portraits will be vertical, right? So we have this kind of difference of that, but it's been around for a while. But generally, most of our monitors are set up to be horizontal at your home. I always ask people, what would, if you want to shoot vertical or horizontal, do you have your TV monitor at home in a vertical configuration, meaning that it's, going horizontally, like up, so it's long, from the top to bottom, versus horizontal, which is how we're used to seeing images, right? So vertical is becoming more and more common. So let's look at what that means. Okay, so here's the question: to vertical or not to vertical? That's the question. So what's the best format for iPad video production? Because now that we can choose between vertical or horizontal, some of the things that we need to consider. So if you want to show on YouTube or Vimeo, most people will really expect a horizontal video, and vertical will end up adding sidebars to the left and right to the screen to show it horizontally. So on the top right here, just grabbed an image of like a beautiful vertical composed video image, and what ends up happening to it when it's in a YouTube horizontal box, right? So you get those sidebars on the left and right to show the vertical image. So that can be an issue. Now, this is changing, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. So if we're posting to social media, the vertical can be pretty effective, because that can end up being like a square that's in the middle for Instagram or Facebook can deal with that. So with social media, you can go horizontal or vertical, and it can translate either way. Many of us, we're familiar with in Instagram or Facebook, you can do like a reframing or decide what's there. So for example, a vertical image, you can create a square out of it for Instagram. and just use the kind of the middle square area, right? So that can be pretty effective. Now, I suggest, and again, just a suggestion for best practices, if you do horizontal, that can pretty much then translate to everything. So if you do horizontal, you can zoom in and extract a square right in the middle, and you can also cut out and make the vertical, right? But the hardest thing is if you shoot vertical, you can't really add anything to the left or right, so you're kind of stuck with that. So then if you wanted to create a horizontal out of the vertical, I know it gets a little bit complicated. If you wanted to get a horizontal out of the vertical, you'd have to crop into that. So you can imagine now you're taking the vertical image and then you're cropping into it. So your resolution all of a sudden becomes a quarter of the full resolution. Instead, if you go from the horizontal and you punch into it, you're not really losing resolution, right? So it's a great way to consider that. So how do you do, what's the best practice? I would say shoot horizontal, then you can extract, you can cut out the sides, and you can make a square out of the horizontal. Now the key here is, and we'll get into the rule of thirds shortly, the key here is if you shoot the horizontal, if you kind of frame for the middle. So you can see right here that example with the keyboard. If that's in the middle of the shot, if there's the players on the side or there's, the furniture is on the right and there's a person on the left, that fills it in. But if they're cut out, it still makes sense, right? We can still identify it. So you have to do something that's called center framing, right? So then what happens is with something like center framing, right? You're looking at, just having this part. I'm right in the center right now as I'm talking to you, right? And then I can cut out the left and right sides, right? But this would be the center framing. So I'm right here. Now, if I'm over here, right, the center framing is harder to do because now I'm over here. So if I do the center, I'd be cut in half, right, my eyes. So if you want to shoot horizontal that's vertical safe, you'd want to be right in the middle of your framing. So the subjects could be right in the middle. And that way, all this information is on the left and right, and that can cut out. But I can still keep a square or a vertical image this way, right? So just some things to think about when you're doing the framing and how to deal with that. Okay, so let's move on here. So camera settings on the iPad. So the camera settings provide the user choices. So that can include the format, frame rate, quality, and also the grid option. So now that we've introduced the format, frame rate, quality, let's look at how that can translate. So I'm just going to cut over here to another camera. Let's see if this will work. Okay, so here's my iPad. Okay, I'm just going to go in here, unlock it. Oh, let me get out of that. There we go. Okay, so, and then what we can do is we basically go over here to, there's a little settings icon. Right, so let me just get right in here. Okay, so that little settings icon down here, this is where we can find it. So I'm going to go to that, right? And then what you need to do is there's a whole bunch of information here about the iPad, right? So if I scroll all the way up here, oops, I went too far. Right over here. Let me get nice and close here. So if you go to what's called the camera, I'm going to click on that. Okay, and it's going to give us a bunch of settings. So let me just go right into the iPad here. So now we can see the settings. So what happens is we have, there's something called grid, and you can see that in the top right there, right? So I'm in camera, in settings, and here's where we can control all our settings for the iPad. So grid, we're going to leave that on, and we'll look at how that can help. So the grid really will help us with composition and framing. There's a element here that says scan QR code. So that allows the camera to read and capture QR codes that can translate to information or websites or things like that. So those little QR boxes with all the little square pixels in them, that QR code. Then when we go to record video, this is the fun part. This is where we can get into different concepts. So we can, if I hit on that, right? So here you'll see on this iPad. So this is a regular iPad. Nothing fancy, just my own personal iPad, 32 gig storage, regular iPad, not a Pro or anything, full-size iPad, not a mini, not a iPad Air or anything, just a regular iPad. And there's two video options here. So here's our formats. right? So we have the 720p HD that we talked about, and then we have the 1080p HD, right? So remember, that's refers to, now that we know, we understand formats, there's the 1280 by 720, so that's the like regular HD, and there's the 1920 by 1080, which is the full HD, right? And then it says at 30 FPS. We know what that is now too. So that's 30 frames per second, right? So that's our standards for the regular iPad, right? So I can then choose whether I want to use the 720 or the 1080. So it gives us a little bit of information too, which is useful. It says a minute of video, here it says it will take 60 megabytes of data for 1080, like 1 minute, right? And a minute will only take 40 in 720. So, and they put brackets space saver, right? So the default in the iPad will be the 1080 and the 720 is our space saver, right? So, you know, that's a great tool of using, you know, one or the other. So if we want to get more on our iPad, we can go to 720. If we're comfortable with the full HD, we want that full quality, then the 1080 is a really great option, right? So you basically just check mark. So I can go from 720 with my finger or go to the 1080, just choosing which one I want to use. And that's going to influence, or that's going to affect directly what the format is that it's capturing, right? So that's in for a setting. So I'm just going to go back here. There's a little bit more under format. So there's high efficiency, the camera capture, right? So there's a JPEG H.264. So there's that format. So the most compatible is, you know, that's always a great way to go with most compatible if we want. And the H.264 is what's called a codec, and that is how the video file is captured, or the codec, how it's wrapped, it's called. And that, because it's the most compatible, that can work on any kind of device, but the high efficiency will work within the iPad, right? So it just depends. Are we going to finish in an iPad, or are you going to send this footage and put it, you know, to a computer, and you're going to edit on another computer or send it out to people, right? So that's kind of the choice there. Most compatible, high efficiency. So that's the settings there. Now, in some of the other ones, different iPad models, when you go to record video, it will have more than just these two, right? So this is their base 720 or 1080. An iPad Pro will also have 4K settings, or the UHD settings, a 24 frame, 60 frame, and that kind of idea there, right? So so that's it for the settings, right? Now, something to remember is essentially the 1080, the full HD, is a really good quality video image, right? So when you go to see most movies in a theater, they're projected at what's called 2K, and 2K is just like a 2000 by 1080 type of video. So it's pretty much like an HD video, and that's what you're watching when you go see a movie, right? So the HD, what you're capturing on this iPad is, you know, not that, pretty much equal quality to what you're seeing in a movie theater, right? So we've got to remember that the small iPad, it might look like, oh, it's just a small iPad for a personal device, but it's a good quality professional image in that full HD, right? So that's a good robust thing. If we go with a 720, again, it's not bad, right? And we'll shoot both, and I'll show you guys we'll look at the comparisons of what that looks like in live, right? So let's do that. Okay, so now with the grid option, so let's look at what that means with the grid option. So I'm just going to go over to the camera here. Okay, and let me just switch over. So what happens here, we'll see the grid, right? So we have these like lines, horizontal, vertical lines. So it creates this 9 square grid. So I hope everyone can see that. So it just gives us that square, you know, 9 different rectangles, right? And that's what the grid does. Right, so if I go back, so that's there, go back to settings, go back to the camera. I'm going to turn the grid off, okay, just to show you guys the difference here. Go back to the camera, right? Now you see the squares aren't up anymore, right? So I recommend, to help with framing and just for balance and even leveling things so they're, you know, we're not tilted, so we can pretty much in line. You can see I can be really out of whack there. If we put the grid on, it's really useful, because if I go to camera, turn the grid on again, like so, come back out here, go to my camera mode, right? That grid really helps with the framing. So now I can kind of see what's, if it's level, balanced, right? And which elements are in each square, right? So how does this translate? So what's great about the grids is it can help us create frames that use the rule of thirds, right? So framing, it's really the concept of choosing and designing what's in your frame, right? And that's, think of your video frame, your camera frame as a canvas, right? So the rule of thirds was established, a while ago. We have, a couple hundred years of these artistic concepts and practices. So rule of thirds was designed to help artists with planning out their canvas for painting, right? So the idea is if you have points of interest that intersect in these rule of thirds, so you can see the circles at the intersecting top left and top right, those areas of interest allow for the most visually pleasing compositions. And then you have the bottom intersecting points. So elements of interest can be there as well. And that really helps with, our eyes and creating a good composition that can work well and that's visually pleasing. So that's the rule of thirds. Okay, so here's an image, a video image, and I put some lines up here, and the lines are the rule of thirds to show the intersecting points. And what you can see there, the soldier is on the top left, right, and the crossing points there. And then the bottom, and then you can see there's the puff of smoke on the right, and the right quadrant there is an interest point as well, right? So the rule of thirds shows that this is a visually pleasing type of image, right? And that is it works well, right? So we have a rule of thirds composed image. And again, this is just a live recreation event that was being captured, and the framing was the grid can help us guide through that. So then going on from the rule of thirds, once we've established some of our composition concepts and ideas, we can also use the shot sizes, can be really integral to helping to tell the story, right? So not only do we want to frame for visually pleasing and aesthetically pleasing images, we also want to use the shot sizes, so for dramatic use. So we can use the shot sizes as a variety of different shots to help with the dramatic telling of a story. So this is this first frame. So this is from a project that was actually done at the Creator Space, a narrative short film workshop. This is an establishing wide shot. So what that means is you can see the characters fully, pretty much their whole body. We can see the room, and it's a nice wide shot for the room to help us establish where we are, right? So that's what's called an establishing wide shot, right? So that's that kind of a shot there. And again, the more information in there, it can really help to show us where we are, give a sense of the location, show us where people are, right? So this is establishing is key. So in our storytelling, so the audience can understand what's going on. Then we can go to a medium shot, which is a two shot, also in brackets I put. So these are two actors in one shot. And the medium shot is basically from, about the knees up or waist up. And it's just the two people. So you can see we're getting in closer. So we get into some more details. We feel like we're in the action more, right? So this is the shot size type. So we have that establishing shot to show where we are. We have a medium shot for kind of the general action. And then we can move into close shots. So the close shots usually are used to bring an audience in for dialogue, or it can be used to help reveal things, right? So we can get in a bit closer. We see that our character has curlers on, he's getting his hair done, right? So these little details that we didn't necessarily see, if we go back to the wide shot, you don't really see the curlers in this shot, right? You start to see it a bit more here, and here you really get the details. So you can see that close shot helps tell the story. And and then the next thing is it's something called a close shot, reverse shot. So it's the other person. So if there's two people talking, we can do what's called shot, reverse shot. So two people talking, we can have establishing shot, medium shot, close-ups. Now shots are the building block of all video production. So I introduced the shot sizes because it's really important to, telling a a story. If we just had one type of shot the whole time, it can get really boring. So you can imagine, you know, sometimes we've seen it. If there's like a conference or something, there's one big wide shot. It's really hard to get into the action of what's going on. But if we have like another shot that's a bit closer in, it's more dynamic right away, right? So always think about using multiple shots, and that helps to tell the story and give us details. So, you know, it's like, you know, video gives us that ability to be anywhere at any given time and help the audience through that. So you want to give, you know, that's the power of video versus, let's say, a still photo or a painting requires the person they can move in. If, you know, someone's in a gallery looking at a painting, you can get in closer to see the details, you can move away, right? So you can get different perspectives in connection with the image, but video lets us guide the audience in there, right? So that's the power there. So let's always think about the shot sizes. It's a really great tool to be able to use. Okay, so let's move on there. So the image control, so shot sizes. So here's what we were just talking about. So every video or film is made up of different shots, right? So that's like the, you know, words in a sentence, right? Together they create meaning for the whole sentence. Each individual word is like a shot, and together we can establish what that whole sentence means with those different shots, right? So we have long shots or wide shots, like we talked about earlier here, help establish the location space, right? So there's that wide shot, these two soldiers walking by the trees, right? And then you get things like these extreme close-ups that really show important details. So, you know, in this case, this is showing us, this is actually the soldier, he's getting a gunpowder packet so he can load his rifle. And that's the detail that we wouldn't see in this shot. We have no idea that he has the side pack that has that gunpowder in a paper roll, right? So here's that detail, right? So imagine if we only saw this, we're not getting any of that information, but by getting into this close-up, we can get into those details. And the iPads are amazing for these extreme close-ups. They're really, really well designed for that. And we'll look at how that can work in creating our shots. Okay, so the camera app. So that's the little icon. And this allows us to take digital photos, right? So that whole camera app, it's not just a video app, right? It's a whole camera app. So it lets us take still photos. There's like time-lapse things, some panorama things. But what it does do is it also lets us do digital video. So let's have a look at how that can work. So I'm just gonna start up here again. Let me just cut over to this angle here. Okay, so if I go to this app right here, so that's that camera icon, right? I'm gonna click on that, okay? And this is gonna load up. So now we have our screen, right? So we have our screen, we have our grid, right? That helps us do the rule of thirds, right? And then we have some settings here on the side. Let's go right into the camera. And what I wanna do is, I'm just blocking the camera there, but right now you can see it's in photo on the bottom right corner. So there's video, photo. So what I need to do is go to video mode. So now it's going to change over, right? So let's look at that again. So if I go to photo, that's what it looks like. And then I'm going to go to video. Notice what happens is we get this red circle, right? So what happens right away is we get this red circle shows up, and that becomes like our video recording icon. So by pressing that, I can start and stop the recording of video. Okay, so now that we have that, that's great. So I have a little setting here on the side here. And what I can do is we're gonna just look at what we can do in terms of shots and things. Okay, so the first thing that I can do is I can hit record. So I'm gonna hit the record button. And you can see on the top, it starts counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are seconds. Okay, and if I hit the record button again, I stop. Right, so now I've recorded that to my storage on the iPad, right? And it goes to my photos. And we'll talk about storage in a little bit. But it's recording right to my photo directory, so it's all ready to go and share how I want. And so that's a great tool. So that's all I need to do with video. I can also, there's a little flip button, so I can flip it around. So if you want to record yourself, right? So now I can be on and I can record myself. We can do like the selfie. Hi, I'm here live from my library, right? So that's the flip button. So you can see it goes either the camera on the back of the iPad or the camera on the front of the iPad, right? So it has those two options. Then we can also go to slow-mo. So if I hit slow-mo, that's going to record at the 120 frames per second that we talked about, right? So we'll look at what that means as well. So that's the slow-mo. So I'll go back to video. And the other thing here is on the left, we have a plus minus. So I can touch that with my finger and I can zoom in and I can zoom out, right? So we have the ability to zoom in, zoom out, which is great, right? That's a really nice feature. I can also do that with, let me just cut to this camera. So if I go right here, right, what I can do too is I can actually zoom in and zoom out with my fingers. So you can see I'm just stretching in or stretching out, right? Stretching in, stretching out, right? So that lets me do that zoom, right? We can do it right with our fingers. So here again, instead of on the left there, I can zoom in using my two fingers to zoom in and zoom out, right? So you can see you can get pretty close. Okay, so that's our features there. Okay, so that's the essence of recording video. So we have our grid line, so we can use our rule of thirds. We have our record function. We have a slow motion function, and then we can zoom in or zoom out. Okay, so that's the basics. So now the camera app is designed to do auto exposure and auto focus. So what does that mean exactly? So auto exposure is basically an automatic exposing computer app, right? And then autofocus is trying to focus automatically on what are the important subjects or what's in that square. So you can see on the bottom right, there's that little image with the yellow box, and that's usually that refers to what the autofocus is focusing on, right? So exposure, let's define what that is. So exposure, we'll hear about this a lot, you know, it's overexposed or it's underexposed, right? So exposure controls how much light enters the lens and exposes the video sensor, right? So the iPad has this sensor that takes in light and translates that light into the image and data, right? So it's all digital ones and zeros, but that exposure is how much light is getting to that sensor. So what auto exposure does is it's adjusting automatically for optimum exposure. So it's based on the settings of, is it indoors, is it outdoors, is it light, or is it dark, right? So that's the exposure part. So let me just, let's demonstrate what that looks like. So I'm just gonna switch over here. So you can see now, if I'm, looking at a window, right, you can see it's trying to balance that out. I'm gonna spin around, go to this image here, right? So it's changing the exposure. Okay, and things are darker, it's going brighter, darker, and so on, right? So it's constantly adjusting based on, watch, I'm going to swing around to a window or light, right? And you can see, look, now it's trying to make that light a bit darker, right? So that's that whole auto exposure. That's great, but it can also be kind of annoying if we want to keep a constant exposure. Okay, so we'll look at that next. How can we lock these things? So now this square, based on where I touch with that little square, that's going to decide what my main exposure or focus point is. So you can see how it's trying to adjust the exposure. So watch as I put my finger closer, right? It's adjusting for the exposure of the focus of my finger, right? And I'll move it away, right? So again, it's focused on the finger, and then it's focusing back, right? So that's that autofocus concept. And what it's doing is it's trying to maintain a focus on the designated area at all times, usually the middle center of the frame. But again, this can cause problems if people are moving in or out of the frame. So then what we can do is we can actually do something that's called locking focus and locking exposure. So if we hold on the focus point on the screen, we can actually lock the focus and exposure so it doesn't change. So this is referred to as AE and AF, which stands for auto exposure lock and autofocus lock, right? So those are the two elements there of what it can lock into, right? So this can help avoid those differences. So if we're moving around a lot from something that's light or dark, or if subjects are walking in front of us, so the shifting focus in and out, so think about this: if we're capturing video and someone walks in front of the person that we're filming, right? The focus will shift to that person because they're closer, and the iPad's going to think that the person's more important, right? So that shifting focus, right, can really be an issue, right? So someone's walking in front of the main subject, and then we're shifting the focus, right? So let's look at how we can lock the focus, right? So what I'll do here is, let me just get something a bit closer here. Okay, so let's get right in here. There we go. Okay, so then what I can do is I can hold, if I hold on this, what happens is now it says right here on the top, if everybody can see, it's going to say AEAF lock, right? And what that's done is now it's locked the focus so that it stays focused and exposed in that area. So let's go right over here. My hand's in the way here. Here we go. Okay. So here I have my little scene set up. Okay. Okay. So you can see it's shifting around, and I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I want to focus on, it's going to bring this mug a little bit closer. My coffee mug here. So I'm going to say, hey, I want to focus on this mug. So I'm going to tap that, and it's going to lock. And you can see the background's a bit out of focus now, and the mug's in focus, right? So that's the lock. So now, no matter where I go now, see that's still staying out of focus, but the mug stays in focus. And even if I put my finger in front, it's not trying to shift focus or anything. It's staying focused on the mug, right? So that's the beauty of the AEAF lock, and we can really control and maintain that locked focus and exposure. And then what I can do is, let's get a little bit, and like I was saying, the iPads really like close-up details. So let's get right in here. I'm going to click on this, okay, and then I'm going to hold on that and get the focus lock. You can see now it's holding that focus really sharp on this vase, and it's not shifting around, right? And then anything else in the background stays a bit out of focus, right? And that detail is really focused, right? And you can see, again, this part, that's a little bit fuzzy, right? And we're locked onto this part right here. So you can see nothing's adjusting, right? Now it's a bit brighter here, but it's not changing the exposure because we're locked on the exposure for this vase, right? So that's a great tool to lock. I just tap again, and it's going to unlock itself. And you can see now it's trying to find that exposure, right? So same idea again. If I go right here, I'm going to focus on this camera on the mug, right? Now that's in focus, and the vase is out of focus, right? So that's the beauty of getting really close. You can lock focus and exposure, and we're good to go like that. Okay, so that's the AEAF lock. It really is your friend. It lets you maintain the exposure and control the camera. Otherwise, it's constantly changing. And I think, if any of you have used a GoPro, same idea. If you're going, let's say you're hiking or on a bike, if you're going from inside the woods to outside of the woods, the exposure changes, it adjusts, right? And sometimes it's not a good thing, or it takes a little bit of time. By locking exposure, we can determine that we want a specific exposure, and the focus is really important. So if we're filming someone talking, if we're filming a scene, dramatic scene, or for a documentary, and there's stuff happening in the foreground, so like in front of the person or the subject, that focus will keep shifting to whatever is closest to the camera. So by locking, that focus no longer shifts, right? So it's going to stay locked. So it's a really great tool. Okay, so then what we can do too is we can do something called manual exposure adjustment. So there's a little sun logo on the right of the focus point on the square, and that can be adjusted up or down. And what you're doing then is you're increasing the amount of light or decreasing it. So we're increasing the exposure or decreasing the exposure. And that translates into making the image brighter or darker. Okay, so let's look at that again through my iPad directly. So here we go. Okay, so we're gonna lock right here. So you can see how it's adjusting, it's all over the place. I'm gonna lock right here on the mug. Okay, so now I'm locked. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit that little sunshine. Oops, I'm gonna lock there. Okay, and then what I can do is I can drag it down, and you can see how we're making it darker. Or I can drag it up with my finger and I can make the exposure brighter. Right, so it's a great way, so I can change the mood and really make it a bit underexposed and darker, or I can make it brighter if we want it, like, you know, to have a brighter overexposed. Right, so underexposed, overexposed, right? So that's the manual exposure that we can do, which is a fantastic tool, again, just to control. I like always going a little bit darker, and I'll tell you why, because if it's a bit darker, it's always easier to boost it. It's a lot harder to take something that's brighter and trying to make it darker, right? So always try to expose a little bit darker than lighter, and then you can always fix it in editing or in color correction software. Okay, so let's talk about storage. So just like this particular iPad that I've been demoing with, it's a 32 gig regular full-size iPad, nothing fancy. Pretty small storage if you think about it, because we have, most of our computers, we have 1 terabyte, right? So this is only 32 gigabytes, a really small hard drive when it comes down to it. So a lot of times the iOS, or the iPad OS as it's called now, takes a lot of space up with the apps and that operating system. It can be up to 80%, it could easily be taken up already. So what you can do is you can set up your photo directory to be stored in the iCloud. So that way you're not storing it locally. So all the video you shoot ends up just going to the cloud, or your iCloud, and that way you can then access it on any of your Apple devices and download it and work on editing it and access it on any iPad. So you can, or a phone, right? So you can record on the iPad. You can then go on to, if you have a iMac or a Mac Mini or even your iPhone, that whole iCloud storage with your photos that includes video can be accessed, right? So that's a great way to store things, because locally you're going to be pretty limited. So remember, we had the 60 megabytes for about a minute, right? So 10 minutes is 600 megabytes, right? So 100 minutes is 6 gigs. All of a sudden you're using 6 gigs of your 32 gigs if you shot 100 minutes. So that could be, a concert or a film that you're capturing different shots for. So it can go really quick. If you do an iCloud, yes, you have to pay for a little bit of that storage, but it's the convenience is that it's there, right? So this is kind of the thing. Do you store locally or do you leave it to the iCloud, right? So that's a choice, but generally, if you don't have a big storage amount on your iPad, it's great to just go to the iCloud. Other things too you can think about, if you want to have your iPad to shoot a lot of video with, then it's important to get a higher storage amount to start when you buy it. So you can get 64 gigs, 128 gigs. So buy more storage to begin with. That way, if your iOS, your operating system, and your data is taking, let's say, 20 gigs, you might still have 100 gigs that you can store video and photos on, right? So if you really want it as a video camera capturing device, I highly recommend it, going above what the basic specs are of 32 gigs, right? And here's something to remember, the UHD 4K, right? That will take up double the storage. So especially if you're going for an iPad Pro and you want to be shooting UHD 4K, then remember that 60 megabytes per minute becomes 120 megabytes, right? So, all of a sudden 10 minutes is 1,200 or 1.2 gigs, 100 minutes is 12 gigs, and so on, right? So it's double. So it goes really, really quick when you're shooting in 4K. So definitely if you're looking at an iPad Pro, and you want to shoot video, I recommend getting, more storage to deal with that. Or again, you can be using the iCloud. It's quite effective, but there is a cost associated with that. Okay, so I think that's it. So that basically takes us through the iPad video production. We have some time now, so we can do a Q&A. If you want to write me any questions, just feel free to type them into the chat. There's an ask a question as well. So just, type out any questions you may have. In terms of the iCloud, I can just quickly show that too. So let's shoot a little bit of video here. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to here. I'm going to shoot a little bit of video. And I'm going to kind of move my camera in so we can do like a moving shot. And I'm going to stop. Okay, and now what does that look like? So I'm going to go over to my photos. And what's going to happen here is I can load all these videos. Oops, it's trying to use on my AirPlay. So here's, the different videos just playing back. So everything's just stored. You can see I have photos of the rabbits in our area and so on. So all this great footage just gets stored in your iCloud, right? So this is all gets uploaded. You can see I have 168 video files, right? So that just keeps going. And then from there, I can use it to download, right? So all the video clips have little times beside them. And that's how you know that they're video, right? Okay. So here's a question we have. What's the best format? Correct term? That is correct. Yeah, the best format. Or I guess we can say the best file format. That'll be a little bit different than the video format for saving videos, for sharing to Facebook and Instagram. So the H.264 is an MPEG-4, an MP4. So that's a great format. So I'm just going to type it in here. The MP4 H.264, and Apple uses MOV files, so that can work too. Facebook and Instagram can take either MP4 or MOV files, and so most video will be captured in that method. Let me just look here. Okay. So here we have, can you recommend a tripod for iPad Pro? Definitely. So there's a different tripod. I don't think I have a good sample of one handy here. But any kind of small tripod, they have really small ones. There's actually an interesting one I just got from Kodak, and it has like a kind of a gorilla, it's kind of like a gorilla grip, so it can move around and go around a tree. And that has like a holder. So what you need is basically some sort of a holder that can clip in an iPad or your phone too, if we want to take it to there. And then that screws onto the tripod, right? So we need some sort of a holder for the iPad that can then go onto a stand, right? So there's usually a little bit of a clip, and then that goes to a thread. And then thread's going to go into a tripod. So I think I have, let me just grab, let's just see here. I think I can demonstrate what the threading kind of looks like. Let me just pull this off from another camera here. Okay, just bear with me one sec here. Perfect, okay. So what you're basically looking for is some sort of the tripod thread. So you need some sort of a thread that can then go into like an iPad holder, right? Like so, and that can screw into it. So you need something like that can grip, and these kinds of threads are the basis of what tripods work on, right? So a little thread and then a little bit of some sort of a holder for the iPad. Okay, next question here. editing suggestions regarding iMovie. Definitely. So the in terms of once you're editing, we have a great multi 4 video series that is about making a short film using an iPad, iMovie, and so on. So if you visit www.tbmcs.ca, you'll find something called the Family Film Project. And that is a multi-series video, and it goes through editing on iMovies in week, the part 3 of the video. And that will go over it. We're also gonna have a live webinar all about iMovie. So I definitely recommend for anyone interested in the editing part, this will be the next part, start shooting on your iPads, capturing video, and then you can check out one of our existing videos or come back for a live webinar that's going to be all about editing on the iMovie. The main thing is you're just working with loading clips in. I recommend not using templates because there are things like movie trailers and things like that. So if you just edit directly and not use a template, you can have your own custom editing process. So we have that video. You can definitely check that out. And like I said, we'll have an upcoming live webinar as well. Okay, I think that's all the questions I see, which is great. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a great session. You can always send us more questions. You can reach me, tom@tbmcs.ca or tbmcreatorspace.com. We have a couple emails you can reach us at. And feel free to check out the upcoming events, events.tbmcs.ca. Once again, my name is Tom Strnad. I'm the lead digital artist. And definitely check out some more of our upcoming webinars. And like I said, there'll be an exciting one all about editing with iMovie and taking this footage. So go out there, capture with your iPads, iPhones, same app. That photo camera app is the same app. So pretty much same things apply. Go out there, have some fun, and I'll see you again with another live webinar, and we'll get into some editing. Okay, take care. Have a great rest of the day.